Hi, everybody. Today's Tuesday, March 17th, 2026, and our dear friend, our brother, Carl Wilkerson, is here with us. Welcome back there.
Good to be with you, Nima. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, happy to Larry, let me start with the breaking news about Joe Kent,
Yeah.
director of National Counterterrorism Center. He resigned in protest against the imposed war on Iran. And he said that I cannot, in good conscience, support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. And it's clear that we started the war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby. And we had Donald Trump responding and talking about what has happened and how he feels about the resignation of Joe Kent. Here is what he said.
President, your director of national counterterrorism, Joe Kent, he just resigned today. He said he can't support your conflict with Iran. What's your reaction to that? And did you?
Well, I read his statement. I always thought he was a nice guy, but I always thought he was weak on security, very weak on security. I didn't know him well, but I thought he seemed like a pretty nice guy. But when I read his statement, I realized that it's a good thing that he's out, because he said that Iran was not a threat. Iran was a threat. Every country realized what a threat Iran was. The question is whether or not they wanted to do something about it. And many people, many of the greatest military scholars are saying for years that presidents should have taken out Iran because they wanted a nuclear weapon. They were, if we didn't do the attack, or if, I'll go a step further, if I didn't terminate the Iran nuclear deal given to us, one of the worst deals ever made by Barack Hussein Obama. Remember when they sent Boeing 757s over there loaded with cash?
Yeah.
Do you have the letter in front of you? Do you have Joe Kent's letter in front of you?
Yeah.
Read the about the third paragraph from the bottom. It's the one about his wife.
Let me just find it here. Yeah, he's talking about his wife was lost in Syria.
Yeah.
And was killed in Syria.
Yeah.
And that's why he hates the war, and that's why he feels this way about the war, these endless wars in the Middle East.
And you got to know Joe Kent before. Joe Kent was really a MAGA staple. He was a MAGA beast. And for him to do this, kind of like Charlie Kirk having his, epiphany about Israel, for him to do this is remarkable because he was an attack dog for MAGA. And that's why they put him in the position they did. And Trump's remarks there were just stupid. Everybody knows that Donald Trump and Joe Kent were pretty close. He wouldn't have made him head of the Counterterrorism Center if they weren't. So this turnaround and that expression of, pain caused by the loss of his wife tells me that Joe Kent had gotten, a real epiphany himself about what this war is all about and what Syria was all about, because that's what he's saying, really. And what everything Trump has done with regard to that region, and for that matter, with regard to Ukraine too, and Venezuela, and potentially Cuba, threatened on Greenland, is Donald Trump. That's Donald Trump. In other words, he's worse than any of the worst Western Roman Empire Caesars that we seem to think we know so much about, whether it be Caligula or Nero or any of the others that were more or less on the bottom of the heap. Trump is worse. And that's what Joe Kent is saying. Charlie Kirk said it about the connection with Israel. Now Joe Kent has said it about Donald Trump.
Do you expect Tulsi Gabbard doing something?
I would think that we were talking about that this morning. Who's next? It's got to be Tulsi. She simply has to do something to resurrect her future. She's not a stupid woman. She's a smart woman. She's a good politician. She had the right feelings about the JCPOA after much study of it. She knew more about the JCPOA than I did when I walked in to brief her. I stopped the briefing. I brought 3 experts with me. You know, Trita Parsi. I brought other people with me. And I said, ma'am, Congresswoman, we don't need to waste your time. You know more about it than we do. All we're going to do is culminate this briefing, get out of your office, and ask you to be with us for it rather than against it. And she said, I will make my decision. I'm still studying. So she needs to resurrect herself. She's got a lot of potential. She's still young. But if she stays with this ship till it goes down, she's finished.
The whole agenda, Larry, is somehow falling apart. It's not just because, when you see Europeans are not that much into getting involved in offensive against Iran, that shows that something going on, and not just in the United States, outside of the United States. Because so far, we cannot say that Europeans were not involved so far. Since day one, they were trying to help the United States defensively, and they tried to defend Israel. But they're not that much, they don't want to be part of this offensive in the Strait of Hormuz. They see that's a red line, as I don't know if we can put it this way. But the whole concept, the whole rhetoric is just falling apart. And you see who's the establishment, who's not the establishment. For example, Mike Johnson today came out and totally defending Donald Trump. And here is what he said, Larry.
Yeah.
On the Gang of Eight, I got all the briefings. We all understood there was clearly an imminent threat, that Iran was very close to the enrichment of nuclear capability, and they were building missiles at a pace that no one in the region could keep up with. They were far outpacing our allies and friends and us in our defense capability, because we had personnel, installations, members of the armed services, and civilians in the region. Iran was building up ballistic missiles at such a rapid pace, and we knew that their plan was to fire them upon Americans. The commander-in-chief and his administration had a very difficult decision to make. I don't know where Joe Kent is getting his information, but he wasn't in those briefings, clearly, because the Secretary of State, the Secretary of War, and everyone, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, they had exquisite intelligence, and we understood that this was a serious moment for us. Had the president waited, I am personally convinced that we would have mass casualties of Americans, service members and others, and our installations would have been dramatically damaged. And so the president felt that he had to strike first to prevent those mass casualties. That's the summary. I can't tell you the classified part, but that's the summary that's made public, and it's accurate. Yeah, Manu.
Let me just tell you what he didn't say. This is what Johnson would have said had he been honest and free with his words. Maybe at the beginning, maybe in the middle, maybe at the end. And we are on God's side. We are on Jesus Christ's side. And we are going to triumph, because it is time for Jesus to come back down. It is time for Armageddon. It is time for the end times. That's what Mike Johnson would have said if he didn't think it would be at that point politically bad to say that from the speaker's rostrum, because that's Mike Johnson.
You know what?
Otherwise, it was mostly lies. There wasn't consensus. No question in my mind now, after exploring it more fully, there wasn't consensus. And certainly Kane, if he didn't advise against it, he gave enough information that any commander-in-chief with half a brain would have said, maybe I'm not going here, and picked up the phone and called Bibi Netanyahu and told him to cease and desist, because he wouldn't be with him. Because Bibi would not have gone had the president put his foot down and said that to him. Johnson's lying through his teeth. He's lying through his teeth.
He's the way that he's talking, his point of view is one of the main reasons that the people came out and voted for Donald Trump. They thought that Donald Trump would be different, but they see that Donald Trump is the same. And those people like Joe Kent, like Tucker Carlson, they're just drawing the
they're
line.
disgusted. They're disgusted with their own people, if you will, because they got led down the primrose path by a lot of people making arguments with which they were sympathetic. Hell, I'm sympathetic with some of the arguments. I'm sympathetic with the argument that we don't need to have wars in the Middle East, stupid wars like Iraq and Syria and Libya and Afghanistan and so forth. That was what Trump was saying. And that's what attracted them to him. Go back and look at those comments. And I wish Johnson would have had Bibi Netanyahu up on the right screen while he was saying what he was saying, where Bibi says over and over and over again for 20 years, Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon in a week or two. Iran is going to have a nuclear weapon next year. Iran is at 90% enrichment. They'll have a nuclear. How many times did Bibi say that? And Johnson was just saying the same thing. This is all manufactured garbage in order to support a president who has absolutely reversed himself on his main tenet with regard to national security. No more stupid wars. Did you listen to me, people? And especially no more stupid wars in the Middle East. That's what he said repeatedly. That's why they voted for him, many of them. That's why they voted. Now he's losing them. He's losing them so fast, it's like rats jumping off a sinking ship. And Johnson is going to stay there till the ship goes down, because Johnson believes it's the end times. He believes God is directing this war.
Larry, what does Donald Trump want from Europeans and from NATO allies? When he mentions that they're not helping us. Here is Donald Trump criticizing Europeans.
And all of the NATO allies agreed with us, but they don't want to, despite the fact that we help them so much. We have thousands of soldiers in different countries all over the world, and they don't want to help us, which is amazing. I mean, amazing. And I didn't do a full court press because I think if I did, they probably would be. But we don't need help. That war has been long prosecuted, as far as I'm concerned, almost from day one. We knocked out many of these things. We knocked out the Navy essentially in a couple of days.
They don't have a Navy to speak of, so he knocked out a Navy they don't have to speak of. He knocked out an Air Force that was so old it couldn't fly. The only thing they have, Nima, the only thing they have is ballistic missiles, and they have plenty of them. Yeah. And, Churchill is always quoted as saying everything that ever was said in the world. But Churchill said the only thing worse than having allies is not having them. Donald, you need to go to school. You need to go to military school. You need to learn what it means to not have allies. And he's losing them, rapidly losing them. And he's losing them because they don't want to do stupid things like he does. And in one case, at least, the Spanish leader, he's losing them because the guy has a sense of ethics and morality. And oh, by the way, did you know 2 more countries joined the case against Israel in the court? 2 more countries. I think before we're through with this, we're going to have anywhere from 30 to 40 countries signing up to South Africa's application to the court for prosecuting Bibi Netanyahu. And you've got more countries each time that if he enters that country, he gets arrested immediately.
Do you feel that Joe, knows that, I'm talking about the Joe Kent. Does he know something that we don't know in terms of the casualties or in terms of what has happened so far because somehow when he criticizing what has happened in Syria, it shows that he's concerned about American lives as well.
Yes.
And it's not just about, and what is the Trump administration, putting out? They're putting out the casualties 6, 7, but there is an interview recently, it was today on Press TV, a senior Iranian intelligence official. He's speaking to the Press TV saying that the United States suffered over 3,200 casualties and staggering equipment losses in the first week of the war. And the two side doesn't come together. The two picture doesn't match, and that's many of us. Is that possible that Donald Trump is hiding something?
Well, I know he's hiding casualties. I don't know if he knows he's hiding casualties because people are afraid to tell him the truth, especially if it's an adverse truth. They don't want to tell him. And the military is no exception to that. They won't tell him either. And let's just back up a minute and say, no matter where you look in America's history, even go all the way back to George Washington and the Revolutionary War, less so there because Washington was probably one of the most upright military commanders we've ever had, and ethical too. America's lied about its casualties in wars. We lied in Korea. We lied in Vietnam. We lied in World War II. We lied in World War I. Wilson was an inveterate liar. We don't ever tell the American people the cost of our decisions to go to war in the full until well after the war is over. Take the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes, where we lost 78,000 in less than 4 weeks. 78,000. That's more casualties than General MacArthur took in the entire war in the Pacific and the Southwest Pacific Theater in which he was in charge. So, and we didn't tell anybody. We didn't tell the American people. It didn't flow back immediately. So, yeah, there's lying going on, but I don't know if Trump is doing it himself intentionally or he's just not very well informed. I don't know what the total count is, but I know it's well over 100. I don't know that Iran's figures are anywhere near accurate either. There's just no way to verify it because there's such a lockdown on real information, starting with the master locker down, Bibi Netanyahu. For example, I think the casualties in Israel are fairly large, but he's not reporting anything. And the newspapers, even Haaretz, are reporting something like, an Israeli was killed today walking across the street, or an Israeli was wounded, but he wasn't wounded badly. She wasn't wounded badly, whatever. A schoolgirl was hit with a flying piece of fragment off a drone that Iron Dome had shot down. That's the way they couch their casualties. But I know they have more casualties than that. I know that, for example, 25 to 30% of the 90+ thousand call up of the reserves went AWOL, didn't get called up because they didn't want to go to Lebanon. So lies are just throughout this thing, and they've been there from the start. We lied about the diplomacy. We've lied about the war. We've lied about the casualties. We're lying about Iran's capacity to withstand us. Just the president saying we destroyed their Navy. Okay. What Navy? What boats did you destroyed a few little boats? Little boats? Yeah, you destroyed a few little boats. Okay. You torpedoed one against international law. It was in international waters coming back from an exercise with India, and you torpedoed it. That was another war crime to go up to our credit. I don't know how to parse this administration with regard to truth. They do not tell the truth. They have made a living on lying. So it's extremely difficult to say what's happening. We know, for example, that the hospital in Landstuhl, Germany, because we have people there, we know that the hospital has, and the press has even carried some of this, it's told pregnant women to go away. It's told civilians in general to go away. It normally serves the community there. It has a really fairly substantial throughput capacity for the central part of Europe in order to send casualties back to America or wherever they need to go for treatment. We know that they've shut down civilian care, and we know that casualties are coming into Landstuhl, but we don't know how many yet, and we don't have someone standing there counting them coming in, but we know they're coming in. And we know, for example, that Iran very carefully, painstakingly even, took out 4 to 5 of the most important radars in ancillary countries. And when they took out those radars, they created casualties. These are in some $200 to $300 million radars. One of them, as I understand it, was $500 million, $500 million. They took them all out with drones and missiles, and blinded us in that capacity for that time. And they, as I said, there were casualties at each of those sites when they took them out. We know that the embassy in Baghdad has been hit inside the green zone, but we don't know the casualties. Rubio's hiding that. So, you know, how will you ever know what the real casualty count is? But we do know that significant casualties have already been taken, both civilian and military.
Lindsey Graham says that Europe's refusal to provide the United States with assistance in the war with Iran will have broad and deep consequences because Donald Trump is angrier than ever. What, Larry, let me ask, because you didn't have the time to answer the question with that clip. What do they want from Europe? What is Europe capable of that the United States cannot do it in the Strait of Hormuz, for example?
Well, I don't think the United States can do it in the Strait of Hormuz. I really don't. So what they're looking for is the kind, first of all, the military is looking for is the kind of help we anticipated that interoperability with NATO forces would provide. And a case in point, we don't have a real fleet of minesweepers. We have some ships that have been called minesweepers because they were in the LCS class, you know, the one Lockheed sent off the waves one day, the first one they built and it broke in half. So this is a really lousy class of ships, if you will, in most sailors' eyes. But we converted them. We didn't want to fess up that we spent hundreds of millions of dollars on ships that didn't work and had no utility. So we converted them into minesweepers in some cases. Now, it's a real problem. Some of them have a metallic hull rather than a laminated plastic hull. So they're not very good as minesweepers. They detect mines. They attract mines if they have metal hulls. All to say that we depend on other countries in NATO who do have minesweepers, who practice it all the time and are very good at it. And that was supposed to be a part of the alliance. If we went to war under Article 5, if we went to war, they would provide the minesweeping. Same with other specialty areas. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for those specialty areas that NATO countries have in excess of what we have, especially minesweeping, to come to the Gulf and help us. And they don't want to do that. And I don't blame them one bit, the way Trump has treated Europe up to this point. If I were a European leader, I would look back at Trump and say, you son of a bitch, would you like me to play the tape you had of your vice president over here at the Munich Security Conference? Would you like me to play the tape of Marco Rubio talking about it? Would you like me to play a tape of you talking about us? Because you're the person who started this split. Now, it was over Ukraine principally, but there are other issues too. Trump made some egregious statements about what NATO had to offer to America's defense, and they didn't forget them. And they've got some real reasons for not really being cooperative. You've got the Spanish leader who's doing it, I think, for moral and ethical purposes, and I applaud him. He has moral courage. But you've got other leaders doing it because they got their own problems. They have significant problems. Look at what they just did in the EU. They passed a law about the time of the special military operations starting almost 5 years ago. They passed a law that they would never buy again Arctic LNG from Russia. It's really sweet, the deal they have with Russia. It goes in European bottoms down to Bremerhaven or Bremerhaven or Le Havre or one of the other ports. And they take everything in their own bottoms. They put their own ships in there. All Russia does is top them off. Russia gets the money and everything's copacetic. And the Europeans have LNG out the yin-yang. What did they just do? They just bought all of Russia's Arctic LNG, and it's going to be shipped down to Europe now. And what did they say when someone said in the press, I was watching it, I forget who the leader was, why did you do that? You said you were going to not do that anymore. You're punishing Russia. Well, it doesn't start till January 27. Do we think they're going to stop in January 27? Hell no, they're not, because they've got to have that LNG. We're not going to supplement that LNG to the point where they can get off Russia. And they're going to have to open the pipelines back up too, Nima, eventually. So Russia's not happy with the way the United States is waging this conflict in Iran. Not happy at all. Okay, so you got to deal with Russia. You got to deal with them in the future, or you are going to be shit out of luck, pardon my French, with regard to your economies. You're already staggering from what we did to Nord Stream. What we did to Nord Stream, you're already being punished for that. Europe's got to figure itself out. It's got to sort itself out. And one of the sorting things it has to do is it can't trust Donald Trump any more than Putin can, any more than anyone in Iran can, any more than anyone in the world can. That's the reality of the United States of America today. No one can trust us.
Larry, Iranian parliament speaker Ghalibaf, he said that the Strait of Hormuz situation won't return to its pre-war status. And they really want to change the whole game in the Middle East. It seems that the Strait of Hormuz is bringing some sort of leverage that they didn't want it before. They didn't want to go that far before because there was no war. There was nothing happening. That's why they didn't try to do anything in the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, the situation has totally changed after the assassination of the supreme leader of Iran. And they feel that the threat is on the doorstep. That's why they have to do something about it. And how do you see Iran going forward managing the Strait of Hormuz?
I've been here and done that. I was one of the planners out at U.S. Pacific Command when we implemented Operation Earnest Will, where we reflagged Kuwaiti tankers and escorted them through this very water, including the very narrow in the North Channel and the South Channel of the very passageway which big tankers go through is only a couple of miles wide, north and south. The north route, as I recall, is very close to the Iranian shore. The south route is further, but it's still interdictable. And we had a significant problem then. And then we had our allies throwing in their efforts, and we had a fairly substantial capability to sweep for mines ourselves, especially helicopter-dragged nets and such. That was extremely difficult. Bridgerton was the name of the MV, big MV, motor vehicle, civilian ship, that hit a mine immediately. The skipper was really angry with us because he did a mine. And all of a sudden, everything changed in the world in terms of insurers and shippers. No one wanted to ship. No one wanted to insure. Rates went off the chart. We persevered. Samuel B. Roberts, a U.S. Navy warship, hit a mine, almost sunk her. She had to limp back to Norfolk, as I recall. She had to go at 4 knots across the Atlantic. We had another ship hit by Saddam Hussein, who fired Exocet missiles at it and hit it. And then, of course, we had the incident that caused Khomeini to say, I'm throwing my towel in. I can fight Iraq. I can beat Iraq, but I can't fight Iraq backed by the United States. And that was occasion when Vincennes, a new Aegis cruiser, shot down an Iranian Airbus and killed 299 Iranian civilians. That's when Khomeini said that and threw in the towel and accepted the UN resolution that stopped that 8-year brutal war. Very different today. Difficult then, very difficult then. Cost us what I just described. We wound up sinking an Iranian destroyer, and we were going to put a bomb down the second destroyer stack, and Ronald Reagan, the president at the time, called us off because he thought we'd done enough damage. In that particular instance, we succeeded in making the strait safe for ships to go through, but it cost us, and Iran did not have anywhere near the capability it does today. And that capability is not their Navy. It's not their Air Force. It's their ballistic missiles and drones. And they can make havoc with that little narrow strip of water. They can make havoc with the entire Persian Gulf if they want to, including the Forbidden Isle, as the Iranians sometimes call it, Karg or Kark up there, about 1/3 the size of Manhattan. And a place, you probably know this, but this has been there for a long time. Saddam Hussein tried to attack it. UAE tried to attack it. They were unsuccessful. You can put 10 tankers in there at the same time, refuel them all at the same time. It's a wonderful facility for the Iranians. The water is very deep there, which it isn't throughout the rest of the Persian Gulf. So that's a prime facility. If we try to take that with Marines or whatever, which is what I'm hearing, they were going to land Marines on there and try to take it. I pity those Marines. I pity that whole complex there, because it'll be probably destroyed in many ways, which has been impossible for so long with so many antagonists. We're going to come down and destroy it. You know, the poet, there's I forget his name now. I forget it, but he calls it something like the orphan pearl of the Gulf in Persian. I think it translates that way. And it is an extraordinary place when you think about the rest of the Gulf and Iran's capacity to move oil and such. And for that matter, other peoples like India and China who receive that oil. That all stops. West Texas Intermediate goes to $200. It's already over $100, I'm told. Brent crude does the same thing, and we have shippers who want ship. We have insurers that want insure, and we're back at the Arab arms oil embargo. You may recall from way back there. You were pretty young then. I couldn't even drive from Fort Monroe, Virginia to Washington, D.C. because there was no fuel, no gas. We're back to that on an extended basis if we're not careful. And Trump has already depleted the strategic petroleum reserve. He's now drawing it down even further to try and reduce oil prices. It isn't going to work, and we're going to be in deep kimchi, as the Koreans would say, and so is the globe if we let this go on. And Iran is successful in keeping those countries it does not want to get through the strait from doing so, and lets those countries who it wants to be able, like those servicing China, to get through. And they can do that. Question is, can we alone stop that? We can probably make it more difficult to stop the flow, but we're going to take significant casualties in doing so. And back to your question, had the Europeans pitched in their minesweeping capability and other assets like that, it wouldn't have been quite so bad, but they're not going to.
We know that the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln is far away from the Iranian coast.
Very far now. They've moved another 300 miles.
Yeah. And not just that, we had, the Gerald R. Ford is getting back to Greece. And while all of this happening, you see Donald Trump forcing Europeans to come in this strait. It shows that the war is not going the way that Donald Trump wants it to be.
And they've seen the accuracy of these missiles. They've seen the point accuracy of these missiles, like the one that hit the facility in Bahrain, right on top of it. And they've seen the capacity of this class, and they know there are a couple of classes of missiles left, like the Mach 3, Mach 4, even Mach 5 missiles, the hypervelocity missiles that you cannot hit with anything. And they are very fearful of losing a carrier. You talk about putting Donald Trump on his back foot and making sure that he gets impeached. Take down an American carrier. Conversely, though, and the Iranians have to be thinking about this because I've been impressed with their ability to think this way. We take a carrier out, 5,000 Americans dead in one fell swoop. Will that make the American people change their mind about this war? Because right now, the American people, 3/4 of the American people do not support this war. And it's growing every day, percentage point or so every week. That might swing the American people in a different direction. So I would be very, very careful about doing that too if I were Iran. But can they do it? You bet.
Yeah. How's the situation with the Israeli defense system, Larry? And we know that they're getting, from two sides, from Iran and from Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And that's
sometimes roughly coordinated at the same time. 200 Hezbollah missiles come in, and equivalent number, not quite as many, but more devastating Iranian missiles come in. It's bad. It's bad.
And you see in the mainstream, in the Israeli media, they're mostly talking about, so what is the outcome of this war? What is the benefit of the continuation of this war? And they're asking this question, which wasn't the case before.
Right. They weren't dying. They weren't bleeding. They weren't scared to death. I mean, they're living their lives in underground shelters.
Donald Trump is trying to bring Syria in, the Jolani and al-Jolani and his gang to go against, Reuters reported that the United States encourages Syrian action against Hezbollah. Damascus is hesitant, but
you bet. You bet. They've seen what happens to the Kurds when they throw their lot in with the empire. The idea that someone like Jolani, or the Kurds for that matter, any one of the groups of Kurds, would throw in now, given the fact that they're going to have Iran in front of them and Erdogan behind them, I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, Erdogan's not going to watch something like that happening and not take action. I know he's been all mouth up to this point, but I think the Kurds refusing, they've just refused to do what Trump wanted them to do. And I can only sympathize and empathize with them, because they would have had the Iranians in front of them with those new attack helicopters that the Russians sent them, and they would have had Erdogan behind them. Erdogan would love to have an opportunity to crush the Kurds in any of their components. Syrian Kurds, Iranian Kurds, or Iraqi Kurds, although he gets along pretty well with Suleimania and Kirkuk and Mosul and places like that now, because they have a pretty good deal with oil and everything else. And so Turkey doesn't mind the Kurds in northern Iraq much, nor do the Kurds apparently mind Turkey much anymore. And Turkey used to send soldiers into that region periodically, all during the year, and kill people or capture people and take them back and torture them. And the Kurds sort of did the same thing back to Turkey across the border there. But they've been pretty peaceful because they're both more or less content with the relationship they have now. But not true with the Iranian and the Syrian Kurds. It's a different ballgame.
The reality of these Syrian, the so-called HTS, the so-called Syrian president, he's the head of HTS. We know that. And what is important, I think, for us to take into account is that these guys didn't fight the government, didn't fight the army, because the army collapsed. Without fighting, they captured Damascus. I don't know how capable are they to fight on the ground against Hezbollah, because Hezbollah fighters, we know them, they have been training and fighting for such a long time. And these people, we don't know that much about the history or the training system of these people in Damascus.
Right. I agree with you. They're an unknown factor in that regard, in that specific regard. Otherwise, I think they're pretty well known. They're Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other types. And one wonders if they really have had an epiphany and changed their mind, which leads me to say that you might get a development you really rue the day in creating if you pitched them as Hezbollah in the flank, as it were, while Israel was taking them on in the front, and all of a sudden they decided to join Hezbollah against you. Because that, to me, would be a very logical development. Very logical. I mean, after all, it's Muslims on one side and Jews on the other. And though there are modus vivendi that have developed in that regard, they don't necessarily stand up when you're killing Muslims in front of them. I don't care, Shia, Sunni, whatever. I mean, the death of Ali Khamenei has more or less demonstrated you can get unity in the Islamic world across sects if you do something as heinous as that.
Donald Trump feels that he can put an end to the conflict as soon as he decides to do. And it's not the case when it comes to the Iranian government. They say that they feel that they have the leverage with the Strait of Hormuz, with the war, with the continuation of the war. And here is what Donald Trump said about his time frame, to open up the Strait of Hormuz.
President, for when cargo ships can safely go through the Strait of Hormuz?
It won't be, I don't believe, too long. We're knocking the hell out of the coast. It's basically the coast and the water, and it won't be too long. And the Middle Eastern states, including Israel, by the way, who has been terrific, the Middle Eastern states have been helping us a lot.
Yeah.
That last statement was a lie. They are not helping us a lot. There are one or two of them, like that vassal quisling Jordan, that are, helping us. But even there, I'm told, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm told, fairly reliable source, that the blow against the radar in Jordan was pretty significant and impressed a lot of people. Depressed them, maybe, is a better word. So they're thinking twice and thrice about doing anything. I don't think they've hit anything in Egypt yet. At least I haven't heard anything. And Egypt's kind of keeping its powder dry. But that was a lie. And then the other aspect of what he conveyed there is that we're in control, we're devastating Iran, and it won't be very long before the straits open and everything will be flowing is just bullshit. Trump bullshit. Now, whether he's making it up out of whole cloth, which he has a want to do, or he's being advised that way, is undeterminable by me, at least at this point. I can't imagine anyone with any competence is telling him he ought to be saying that. So I have to believe he's doing what Trump normally does. He's pulling it out of his rear end.
Larry, what's dangerous about Donald Trump is that somehow when you listen to him, it seems that the guy is totally disconnected with the reality. And he's trying to making things up, I don't know, he's receiving false information. And when it comes to the AI, he says all these people on streets in Iran are AI. They have produced AI pictures. Yeah. You have to be totally, disconnected with reality to argue that.
He is very reminiscent in general, not specifics, but general, of Biden towards the end of his last year, almost as if he's demented. Now, he has moments like in these press conferences where he's a little bit more in control of himself, both physically, his body, and his mouth, than he is other times. I've seen him going to the plane and making comments, coming from the plane or the helicopter and making comments where I wonder if somebody needs to grab him, because he's going to collapse. He's going to fall over and die right there on the tarmac or on the grass, because he looks so disheveled and so uncontrolled and not really physically fit at all. I don't know how they get him pumped up for these things like these press conferences where he seems to be able to handle himself, although sometimes there, as you've probably noticed, he looks like he's, a baby or puking in his own lap. I'm told you don't want to be standing too close to him because it's putrid around him. I don't say that, in a way to personally deride him. I'm just saying that I'm not sure he's in control of all his facilities all the time, especially his mental facilities. But when he does gear it up, like for a press conference or something like that, or he's meeting somebody important, he can utter things that are still utterly ridiculous. And it's just part of his modus operandi. That's who he is. He's a grifter. He lies for a living. He cheats for a living. He's deceitful for a living. That's what he is. It takes me back to all those times I went to New York between his first campaign and this presidency. And I'd ride in taxis. You always find out about people from taxi drivers. And in New York, it's especially that way because New York has a lot of foreigners driving taxis foreigners looking for their citizenship or a green card or something, yes, but not like Washington, D.C. I have never ridden in a taxi in Washington, D.C. that wasn't driven by a Somali, a Pakistani, an Indian, or some other group. And lots of times they have PhDs in their own country and they can talk to you endlessly. In New York, you get New Yorkers much of the time. And I talked to them about Donald Trump. They hated his guts. They had no kind words for him. They said he was a swindler. They said he was a con man. A couple of them, I was en route to Great Neck, and this very, very vocal taxi driver told me he was a mafioso and that he knew he was a mafioso because his brother was. And his brother had told him about Donald Trump meeting with members of the mafia. You know, so Donald Trump is hated by New Yorkers who count, New Yorkers who are at that level where the work gets done in New York City. They hate his guts. So I knew immediately from just that informal conversation on many trips to New York City that he was not the kind of person you wanted to be president of the United States. And I've just had that ramified 100,000 times again and again by his being president. He's a grifter. He's a mafioso. He's a gangster. That's who is our president, Nima. You don't have too far to go to realize that, because your man, I think, preceding Lula, was too, is too. He's a capitalist gangster, maybe. But so is Trump a capitalist gangster. He's a predatory capitalist par excellence. He just specializes in real estate instead of banking. That's who is our president. Americans need to wake up.
Larry, considering the war in Ukraine, the economic war in China since 2010, and with the new tariff war during the Trump administration, and coming to the new war between Iran and the United States, you know, the war on Russia, China, and finally on Iran. And here comes the concept, what is happening to this world? You know, there is a new article in Financial Times. The title is "The Era of the U.S. Dominance in Economic Warfare is Over." And is arguing, this article argues that Iran's actions in the Strait of Hormuz show the reality of multipolar economic warfare. For decades, the United States dominated sanctions and used financial pressure as a strategic weapon. Now, other powers, including Iran and China, can use similar tools to response in response to escalation. Is this picture accurate, in your opinion?
I think it is, and I think it's just going to worsen with regard to us, to the American empire. I think you see a composite example of this in the fact that, well, let me ask you a question. If you were saying, what is the most important country in the world today from an economic and a security perspective to the empire, what country would you name?
I would say just one.
Just one.
It would be Russia.
Okay, I'd say China. All right, I'd say China because China is the one becoming a replacement for us. All to say, whom did he just postpone or even cancel a meeting with? The leader of that country. And why? The reason is he's at war. That's what he said. Does that tell you something? You're at war with a country that presents no threat to the United States of America at all. And you're, because of that war, canceling a meeting with the man who means everything to the security of America. You don't need to say anything other than that. It's ridiculous. It's an evaluation of the situation in the world that makes you want to puke. It means our president has no idea what is going on. Now, the way you should answer that, Nima, if you're a geopolitical, geostrategic genius, is you should say, no, you don't understand the people behind Donald Trump. Maybe not Donald Trump, but the people behind him who are directing Donald Trump realize what you just said. And they're using Iran and the war therewith to try and get at China, to try and stop the most dangerous base road initiative China has going, the one running through Iran, up the Persian Gulf and into the Caucasus. So this is the game. This is the great game back in action with new players, the most prominent of which is the United States, now making war on Iran, not to make war on Iran, but to make war on China. I'll buy that, but I don't buy the fact that this administration has the sense to know that. Iran just has the disadvantage of being in the way. We're after China, really. I would buy that. If Donald Trump came out and told the American people that, I would buy that. I wouldn't necessarily buy the answer that going to war in Iran was the way to stop that. But I do understand the geostrategic purpose of taking on China if you believe they are antagonistic to your interests to the point you can't deal with them. See, there's where I differ. There's where George H.W. Bush differed. There's where even George W. Bush differed. They thought better to deal with China in the economic sphere, compete with China in that sphere, than to go to war. That's not what Biden believed, and that's not what Trump believes, I don't think. But I know the people behind him don't believe that. They think war with China is inevitable, best to take them on indirectly. And the first theater that they've agreed on was Russia and Ukraine. That didn't work too well, so now they've shifted down to Iran. The active theater, though, is much bigger because they're in Azerbaijan, they're in Armenia, they're in Georgia, they're in all of the peripheral Russian countries that they think will give Russia a hard time, trying to foment rebellion, trying to foment new policies. They're in Georgia big time, in Tbilisi. But Iran is the active theater now, the southern flank, if you will, of China's base road initiative. They're trying to stop China. That makes sense, but it doesn't make sense the way we're dealing with it.
There is something deep happening in the United States, even with those, during the war with Ukraine, we've learned from, for example, Scott Ritter was talking about that there is no real Russian analyst in the United States. But in my opinion, when I saw what was happening with the conflict with Iran and now the war against Iran, even with those people who are partly Iranian Americans who I know, I don't want to name because they're not right now to defend themselves. They don't know Iran, Larry.
God.
You know
how I saw that most vividly? Are you familiar with Khosrow Semnani? He's a billionaire Iranian. He owns I'm told he owns somewhere close to 95% of the nuclear business west of the Mississippi, mostly nuclear waste and things like that. But he's a multi-billionaire, lives in Salt Lake City. I met with him at a time when Trita Parsi and I were trying to convince the Iranian community in America that we knew the most about, Khosrow being one of them, to help us get the JCPOA through. And I learned in that time with Trita, especially going up and down Orange County in California and other places where Iranian Americans lived who had lots and lots of money. I learned that there was a very, very wide array of opinions and views. Most of them did not want a war, but they wanted the regime gone. And they were willing to do just about anything short of war to get rid of the regime, to include some of them backing the Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, to include also backing other dissident Iranian groups with money and so forth. Khosrow, for example, was kind of somewhere in the middle, because he had a general license with OFAC, Treasury, to send a whole ship full of humanitarian supplies, food, and everything else to Iran once a year. And they approved that. And he would ship, I think it landed in Chabahar or Bandar Abbas, somewhere like that, offloaded. And, you know, Iranians got whatever Iranians needed, they got off that ship. And it included a whole array of medical supplies that Iran had difficulty getting through sanctions and that sort of stuff. So he was doing that sort of thing. But even he was kind of a dual mind about who he would support and what he would support in order to overthrow the regime. Well, all of that to say, what I found out, I think, for my own knowledge, was that none of them had any idea about what they were saying in real terms. They were so divorced from the Iran that they had left, usually around 77, 78, 79, and the Iran now, especially the Iran that had evolved out of the long, bitter war with Iraq and was now in existence. They simply didn't understand it. They went back to the days of the Shah or just after them. So I don't know what to say about, except that I would say don't take advice from any of those people. Don't take advice from any of them, except the few that we did meet some of who were all for the Iranian people and said, essentially, if democracy or a better form of government in terms of the people is to come to the Iranian people, they themselves need to achieve it, not outsiders, not outsiders. There were quite a few of them that felt that way, dentists, doctors, and others, wealthy Iranian Americans who felt that way. And incidentally, they gave the most money to Trita.
Larry, comparing to Iran during the Iran-Iraq war, the population today in 2026 is twice the population that it was during the Iran-Iraq war.
Right.
The food production today in Iran is 8 times they produced during that. You know, they producing more food.
Which is one reason why they're running out of water.
Yeah. But the water, when it comes to the water, Larry, they're less than almost 2%. They're dependent on the desalination plants.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
I knew that wasn't a big blow, but the thing I'm hearing from climate people, these are people who are totally neutral in terms of who's running what and so forth. What I'm hearing from the climate people is that because of the way they do agriculture, they had these incredible reservoirs of water. They're not quite like our aquifers, but they are roughly the same in terms of providing water from deep underground. Because of their methods of agriculture, they have really drained those in the last 30 years. And they're looking at the potential for climate to really give them a blow if it's not already giving them a blow. And this all has to do with, you know, same thing we're doing in our country, just draining in order to raise crops, you know.
But after all, Larry, what I wanted to say that when I got back to Iran after more than 12 years, I saw a country economically more powerful, and the cities have totally transformed. The cities were much more beautiful, and everything was.
Which is why this bombing is such a shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Historical sites, 1,000-year plus old historical sites. We're just bombing them.
And many people don't understand that Iran was invaded, First World War and Second World War. It was invaded by foreign countries, and right now I think I criticize many people who are arguing that Iran is weaker than before, that 10 years ago, 12 years, 20 years ago, Iran is in a much stronger. When I got back, I really perceived that Iran in a much stronger position right now. That's why they feel so comfortable, you know, to continue the war. This confidence doesn't come from, you know, weakness. It's come from, you know, how they're confident about their capabilities.
I agree. And look at what we've done. We were talking about this yesterday. Two people that I used to teach with. One's a geologist and one's a historian. And our point that we all agreed on was what we have done in essence is we have made a country that, as you said, was growing more and more powerful in terms of its cohesiveness and its people every day, arrive at that point even earlier than they would have. And we're going to regret that dearly because they're going to fight us to the death. And that's the wrong way we should have approached it. You know, another person who's an anthropologist essentially said, look, I've been in and out of Iran for 30 years. And I will tell you right now, the nascent movements among the Iranian people for a better government were going to triumph. They're going to triumph. All you had to do was let them alone, nurture them in any way you could that was not CIA oriented, Mossad oriented. You know, what do you mean by nurture? Well, I mean, if they ask for help with media, with newspapers or something like that, you offer them help. If they ask for help with farming, you offer them help. If they ask for emergency aid because of an earthquake like they had in Bam in 2003, you offer them help. But you don't act like you want to change their regime. You let them do that. You know, I think that's right. I think that's right. That's not the way you approach other countries, Iran or any other country, you know.
Larry, before wrapping up, we know that the air defense system is not working the way it was working when the war started, and Israel is somehow in a desperate situation. And many people would argue that Israel may go, you know, after they may use nuclear bombs against Iran. They may go nuclear. And here is what Donald Trump said about Israel using nukes.
Advisors David Sachs said the other week that the U.S. should, quote, declare victory and get out of the Iran war. He also warned that if the conflict escalates, Israel may contemplate the use of a nuclear weapon. Has he shared that assessment with you?
No, yes. And Israel wouldn't do that. Israel would never do that. And yeah, there's a theory. You pounded them to hell and you could just leave now and it'll take 10 years for them to build back not nearly what they have right now. And I guess that's another theory, but we want to have it ended so that another president doesn't have, look, for 47 years, no president was willing to do what I'm doing, and they should have done it a long time ago. It would have been a lot easier. There's no president that wanted to do it.
This is the same guy who said that you're not going to get a new war in the Middle East with me. And he's right in the middle of a new war with Iran. And he says Israel is not going to, I think we have to go, nobody would, you know, believe what Donald Trump is talking about.
You know what I would have said to him right there if I were in his face at the time he was saying it? I would have said, why do you think, Mr. President, 47 years of presidents didn't do it? Have you given that any thought? You're implying they were cowards. You're implying they didn't know what they were doing, whereas you do. You're implying that you're the smart person, and all those presidents over those 47 years, and I'll take you all the way back to Dwight Eisenhower if you'd like, you're implying that they were stupid or cowards or both. You want me to believe that you now are smart in what you're doing? Tell me, why do you think they didn't do it? He'd be speechless. No, he'd make up a bunch of lies. But that's how stupid what he just said is. Now, you could say, as you were just implying, you were smarter, Mr. President, when you were running for president because you said this. And let me quote you. And you could quote him 20 or 30 times. No more wars in the Middle East. No more this, no more that in the Middle East. How'd you change your mind, Mr. President? Why'd you change your mind? May I suggest the reason you changed your mind was the persuasiveness of that little shithead known as Bibi Netanyahu? because he had so much money in your coffers and because he knows lots about you because of Epstein. Now, the guy can't even lie well anymore. I mean, he never could lie really well at all, but he's just egregiously that way now. It's almost painful to hear him.
Laurie, have you ever thought about Israel using nuclear bombs against Iran, and what would be the reaction? What would be the outcome of that for Israel?
I think we've got a wholly new scenario now, Nima, actually. Some of us have been giving some really heavy thought to this. One bomb would not really do a lot. So if you were militarily advising Netanyahu, and he has some military advisors like this, you would say multiple weapons. You wouldn't just use one. One would not really, in that big country, unless you were able to convince yourself to drop it on Tehran or something like that, one hopes and prays that wouldn't happen. And that would be a war crime of just unimaginable proportions. It would probably seal Netanyahu's doom before the court, if not elsewhere too. So if you were going to use them in a militarily effective way, you would use more than one. You'd perhaps use a dozen or more. And you'd use them in key areas where you knew that the effect would be not so damning of you in terms of the press that occurred afterwards. And you knew you'd be bringing yourself some kind of military advantage or achievement, particularly knocking out ballistic missile sites or something like that. So our conclusion was, if you had good military advice, you would not just upload a few, as they were doing in 1973, to drop on the Egyptian Third Army, and the Russians and us Soviets at the time and us got really concerned and weighed in on it. They would do it in a much more extensive way. And we wouldn't have just one bomb going off. We'd have a dozen or so bombs going off. And then we asked ourselves, what would that mean? That would really let the genie out of the bottle, because it would support those in this country, for example, young people who don't know anything about the Manhattan Project or about Japan or any of the history of these weapons. Just think of them in technological terms. That would support their theory that we bought them, we pay for them enormously, we pay for them. Why can't we use them? So you would be opening an entire new regime of warfare in our view. You would be saying to the world, oh, look, see, they were used there. We have horrible aftermaths, maybe, especially if they're air bursts instead of ground bursts, where you get lots of radiation. Think Chernobyl, for example, many Chernobyls. This would be a horrible development, and yet it makes sense in that narrow way from a military professional point of view. You wouldn't want to just use one, and you wouldn't want to use it on a city. You'd want to use them effectively in military terms, and you'd want to use lots of them. This is a horrible development to have happen. But I don't put it past Bibi. I don't put it past Bibi at all, especially if he thinks things are getting so dire that he has to deliver a hammer blow in order to change the correlation of forces, change the whole appearance of victory or defeat. I think I told you Haaretz had that headline, right? The headline said, all Iran has to do is not lose to win. Iran and the United States have to achieve a Trumpian victory to win. You know, they got to achieve that kind of victory to win. So this is a bad situation.
I think, Larry, from what I have perceived from Iranian officials, they're considering that scenario as well. And they said that they know how to respond. I don't know what would be that response. I don't know what do they have in their, army, in their, arsenal.
That fifth class of missiles.
Yeah,
that last class of missiles, the ones that go at Mach 3 or Mach 4.
And how Israel would survive that sort of attack. That could be, and Demona, if they attack Demona, so it's not just about, it's totally, the case is somehow so complicated if they go that far against Iran.
Nima, I wouldn't be surprised at all that Israel hasn't dispersed its nuclear arsenal and not told anybody, not us or anybody else. Probably very narrow group of Israelis that know they've done it. But all you would need would be a bomb shelter or two here and there, and just, cordon them off, put signs up, do not enter, forbidden zone, whatever, which Israelis are really good at, and then put the bombs there, or put the missiles, whatever. I think they have actually crafted a cruise type missile that they can fire from their submarines. Netanyahu has as much as admitted that on occasion in sort of cavalier remarks, that he can also send them from his submarines. So I think that's probably true, that they have developed a capability to do that. I don't think it's true ballistic missile like we have, the Tridents or whatever. I think it's, you got to surface the submarine and fire it off the submarine's platform. Kind of like a Tomahawk with a nuclear warhead.
Because all Iran needs to do is just hit Haifa and Tel Aviv. And, these are
doing a pretty good job of it right now. I mean, the scenes I've seen are pretty horrific. They hit their oil facilities in Haifa. I don't even know that they're functional.
Thank you, Larry, for being with us today.
Sure. These are
great connection, as always.
I wish we had some good things to talk about.
Yeah. But
How are your children?
They're doing good. They're doing
good.
Fine. Yeah.
Good. At least that's positive.
Yeah. Thank you, Larry.
Tell Bolsonaro I said hello.
See you on Friday, Larry.
Yeah, take care. Larry and me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. See you then.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.